Hey everyone, in this video I'll be showing you the best red prince build in Divinity Original Sin 2. This will be for Acts 1 and 2, focusing mostly on warfare and summoning, which I think he does very well due to his unique abilities here where he can set up a fire surface and then create a fire incarnate. Now this is going to be for a physical team that I have going on here, so we will mostly be focusing on blood incarnates, but you do have the option for elemental damage if we need it. Now tanky builds aren't really amazing in Divinity Original Sin 2, however this one actually works pretty well. So the thing is, what we want to be focusing on is on our first turn of combat, setting up our incarnates and then getting them buffed up. And then we got a bunch of physical damage skills to fall back on, with things like bouncing shield being really nice because we can use a shield to give ourselves some extra damage. And then we can also reflect things with deflective barrier. And we also got those elemental totems. Now I recommend grabbing the Conjurer Incarnate here. A bleed version would be best if you're on a team that's got a physical damage. So I got my Incarnate summoned in there, and it's best to give it a power infusion too, just so that it's going to do a bit more damage. And you can go ahead with that there. It'll increase damage by 25% and give it a new move. And then you could also buff it up with something like the Farsight Infusement. But since I have 2 more action points, it's nice to pop down an elemental totem as well. And you can pop that from blood as well. There's electrified blood, which can pop that down. And then it's going to attack it. Targets, unfortunately, that was the air version. And then we got our Incarnate here, which I gave it Fireball, Whirlwind, and Battering Ram. Battering Ram's nice because if there's a target that does not have its shields, you can then use your Incarnate to knock them down. And then you still have something like a Fireball, unfortunately faints in that area there. But yeah, pretty solid damage off the Incarnate. As far as our attributes go, I like to go about a strength build. Is this going to give us more physical damage, which is what we'll be doing when our summons are up and ready. Now, you don't need intelligence actually for any summoning because it's going to use the summons ability scores instead. Constitution being not the best because, face it, whenever your shields are down, you're going to get crowd controlled, and that doesn't really help out that much. So I like a few points in the Constitution, mostly just to unlock gear. And we actually do need some points into our memory skill here because with this is going to make us able to learn more spells. Now, a lot of people really like to pump up their wits whenever they run a summoning build because it's good to go first. However, I have someone else on my team that's wits and they got a critical chance build going. And the way that initiative works in Divinity Original Sin 2, it's not best to have multiple high wits characters. So that's why I went with strength because this character is meant to be tanky, deal damage, and have our summons deal with the enemies. Now, this brings us to our abilities, where I like to have some points in our warfare. I have 10 here, and 8 points into our summoning. The reason I went with a good warfare is this gives us 50% more physical damage, which is important because that's going to be a large chunk of what we do. Summoning is important, though, because it's going to give them more health damage. And you could honestly take the warfare down to 8 and put a couple points into summoning here. I do find that we do get a little bit better bang for our buck from having a higher warfare skill, but you could alternatively put those points into summoning as well. I also like to have a couple points in pyrokinetic because there's actually a very powerful warfare pyro skill that we want to have on this setup. And we do have a bit of fire damage. Obviously, the Red Prince as a lizard has those skills, but we don't really want to use those as we're a physical base build. 1 point into Scoundrel's nice if you wanted to grab the Adrenaline here, or if you wanted the Pawn, as we are going to need a talent for a bit of movement. I did a build yesterday where we used Polymorph on Los's build, so you can check that out if you want more of that. Hydrosophis is nice. I have 2 points from gear. This will give you some healing spells, which are actually kind of nice to have on a tankier character. However, I think that pyrokinetic, warfare, and summoning are our top 3 skills that we'd want to have. And then for our civil abilities, Lucky Charm is nice. Now, as far as our talent scope, there's actually 4 good ones here. So it's between a few different choices. So Executioner, I really like this. Have this or the Pawn. Either of these will be ideal. This one will just give you an extra 2 action points when you take out an enemy once per turn, which is actually pretty good if we can get comboing and set up with our summons. I also like to take the Hothead here, 10% critical chance and 10% more accuracy at full health. This is really good because, again, we don't have many ways to get crit chance, so anything that helps is great. And again, instead of Executioner, you can use the Pawn just for that extra movement speed, which I think benefits a lot of people. The Opportunist is great. Since we'll be in melee range, we want to have an ability to deal damage. And with our summons, it kind of messes with the enemy's AI and makes them run away often. So we're able to proc our opportunity attacks quite often. I also have the Torturer. This is if you want to go for more of a fire burning style build. As with this, it's going to make it so that you ignore physical or magical resistances whenever you're trying to apply things like burning, poison, bleeding, etc. This is really good with specific weapons as well. Not the best choice, however, because I actually think that it's kind of funny, but Far Out Man, increase the range of skills and scrolls by 2 meters. This means that we can put our summons in a further radius, which is actually really good. I personally like to go with something like that, as this just helps out with our summons, which is kind of a big focus of this build. Glass Cannon is another option if you want, because with this you get 6 action points, so we can set up our summons at the very first turn of combat. but you do get hit with a bunch of crowd control. And since we have a bunch of extra shield and survivability, I think it's best to not go with glass cannon here. But mnemonic here is also a good choice because we do need the extra memory points. But honestly, since we don't really need wits on this build, we can kind of spread them around this way. So it's not fully necessary, but it is a good option. And living armor is actually another really good choice here. So if you want to take off something like Hothead, you could throw on living armor and give yourself so much more survivability. So it's either this here, the Executioner, Fire Out Man, living armor, and Opportunist, or you could also swap in the Hothead as well. Now for our skills, I like to personally have that Conjure Incarnate, which you saw at the start here, because whenever you pop this down, it's just going to give us a consistent amount of extra damage, and it spreads aggro between everybody. The Power Infusement's also nice, increasing the damage by 25% and giving it Whirlwind and Rush. Whirlwind's great if there's multiple enemies spawning around it, which is typical, so great. I also like to go with the Farsight Infusement, as you can get Fireball if it's on a fire surface. This will also increases its damage by 25%, so you can pop both of these. It takes 1 action point each, and then they get a new attack. Honestly, quite good. We also want to have the Elemental Totem here, so target the ground and conjure a totem of whatever element, blood again being the top one here, and it'll fire projectiles at the enemy, so it's just going to help out with the chip damage. So you could ideally drop down the Conjure Incarnate, have the Elemental Totem. If someone gives you haste, you can then pop one of these on it. And then Rallying Cries here, which is nice whenever you have multiple targets and totems in your area, you give additional healing and magic armor. So this can be good for survivability's sake. Adrenaline, just very useful because sometimes you just need those extra 2 action points. That can be a Rallying Cry that you're able to pop where you normally weren't able to. Also, Pyro. We want this Pyro Warfare. So you can get this by purchasing 1 Pyro book and 1 Warfare, no source skills. Combine them together in your inventory, and you'll get this Sparking Swings ability, which is really good. This causes your melee attacks to create spark projectile that bounce off the initial target to hit the closest enemy. This is really good because it's a big boost for our damage per second with only a 1 action point cost. This is nice for 3 turns. I also have the Deflective Barrier here. If there's a lot of projectile attacks, this is good to help protect from those. Bouncing Shield, really good DPS, especially since we're going to be using a shield here. I also have the Farsight Infusement for that though, but Battle Stomp being another one. If the target's health and our physical armor's down, we're going to pop this immediately. And I also have Battering Ram from Gear, which is kind of the 2 that we want to have. Whirlwind being a great attack whenever there's enemies nearby us. This is going to be somewhat often, so I like to have that. I also like to have Haste on ourselves because this is actually just a net positive to our character. We'll get an additional action point on our next 2 turns. And this just means that we get it for free basically after that. I also like to have a bit of the Hydrosophist skills here, so having Restoration will give you the ability to cure bleeding and poison and restore vitality on a target for 1 action point. And then for 2 action points, we have the Healing Ritual, which will send a wave of healing to other targets, and this can also heal 97 vitality, pretty solid. We do have the Demonic Stare, which will strip magic armor, which is great because it gives it to us as well. And then Dragon's Blaze, which will leave a fire surface if we want to use something like the Elemental Totem and the Conjure Incarnate for that. But I have a full team on Bleed, so you can check out the other builds for that. I'll be posting a team composition here in the future. I also have the shields up from this. So we have a lot of tankiness, we have our summons, and then we have decent crowd control and damage. And the priority for our gear, typically we're going to want to look for any type of warfare and summoning, strength being our main skill here. So anytime you can get increases to strength and warfare, those would be ideal. Hydrosophist, again, gives you some more heals. Pyro is not really the ideal role. We don't really need too much Pyro as we already got 1 point for the skill that we need. Looking up for increased health is nice and critical hit chance. We have 700 roughly health here, so we're going to be tanky, and we can continually keep healing and summoning in different things to help out. Now, again, these boots give us the Battering Ram skill. Look for strength, warfare, and summoning. Those are our top ones here, so yeah, this one's nice. 2 warfare, 1 summoning, and extra health. We can get our resistances up really high, water resistance being 33% here, but we even have natural fire resistances. And for our shield, look for one that's going to reflect physical damage. There's also some that has a 10% block chance, which is nice too. This one inflicts burning on contact, which I think fits very well, and then also does that physical damage on attackers. And then look for silence on your main hand weapon. Silence is great because you can stop spellcasters, which is very good. This would ideally have Life Steal 2 on it, but critical chance is great as well. And yeah, typically whenever we get into a fight, we're going to want to summon in our totem there. This is what the blood one looks like. And we also have the blood incarnate. The incarnate's really nice because this just gives us 10 turns of something that's going to be good to take aggro for our team, and then we can buff it up here even further. I would recommend giving it both infusements as quickly as possible. Note that it does look kind of like a Quasite from Baldur's Gate 3, but then once we got this one here, it's got Mosquito Swarm, Whirlwind, Battering Ram, and the ranged incarnate attack, which does a pretty respectable amount of damage. The thing being is it's got battering ram there, which will knock enemies prone. So not only can you and your team do this form of crowd control, it can do it as well. It has decent physical and magical armor with 285, 281, 300, and then 152 health. So it's good to be able to get a couple attacks off and also do some crowd control for you. What's great too is that Mosquito Swarm is actually pretty powerful to sustain itself as well. In combat, I would recommend summoning in our Incarnate. Anytime there's blood nearby, that's not going to be too hard because honestly, this is a status that's very common in the game. And then after that, we can put the power infusement on it. So nice thing about Fire Out Mana is this lets you do this from a range here. So we can go ahead buffing up our summon with all the abilities that we want to have here. And then what we're going to be focusing on is using the totem other than that. You do have to mouse over and sometimes you're going to see like fire, blood. So yeah, look for the blood one. It could be also getting itself on fire too. Just a heads up on that. Now we also have the sparking swings here that we can use to be able to apply that fire damage on our attacks as well. So I'd recommend setting that buff up early. And you saw there, it did a bit of extra bleeding damage on that target there. And now we got our little incarnate Quasite looking thing. This enemy's knocked down now. We got range attacks and we also have battering rams, so if they weren't knocked down, we could have used that, but this is good for just a bit of extra damage and the bleed off, and then we can go with the ranged incarnate attack, which is a short cooldown. That's enough just to get some damage off on them. Unfortunately, I got hit with mute, so that means that I can't actually use any of my healing spells, but that's not too bad. Since I went around warfare, we're still honestly very powerful when it comes to combat, so I would recommend, even if you end up getting your, even if that happens to you, you can still go away. You saw there that the fire bounced off of this target here. Now, the only downside is there is still magical armor, and these ones have a fairly high magical armor, so that's not going to be the highest amount of damage, but it's good if there's targets that don't have any type of shield up. Then we have our Quasite for the ranged attack here, which can finish off some targets like that one there, which is just perfect. And then we can use the battering ram if there's a target that's got really low shield. Unfortunately, there's none that I can actually make it in. Oh, we actually were able to. Cool, knock them down, saved. Now our totem is down, but we still have the incarnate up. This target here needs to be crowd controlled, so I'm gonna just go ahead and we'll try the battle stomp here as our last attack, and hopefully we're able to knock them down just like that and knock the other target. Perfect. That's why warfare skills are so good. We still have one action point too, so I can actually use the adrenaline here, as this game is all about trying to get as much damage out as quickly as possible. So I'm then going to summon in the blood totem here just for some more chip damage, as there's still some targets that it could pick away at. And then I can also then, with my last action point, apply haste. And then this was able to take out a target, which is perfect. So that's the nice thing about blood totem, it's going to do physical damage. We still have our Quasite thing here, which can take out this target here. Perfect. And then it can use the whirlwind. It won't be able to make it down there in time, but we can make it walk. And our totems and summons are able to pick off a couple enemies. What's nice is we do have those healing spells to fall back on, so if you need your team a little bit more healthy, this is a great way to do it. And then we can also finish off with something like a battering ram or bouncing shield. Typically a damage option we want to use often because it's just going to be so powerful, and it has a short recovery, so that's really good too. And there's a bleeding off on that target, and then our incarnate will get the high ground and take them out, which is perfect. So there it is. That is a powerful build for the Red Prince in Divinity Original Sin 2. Summoning, I think, works well because if you need the magic, you can set a fire really easily. Otherwise, bleed is so easy. Everyone's getting hit, so you can pop those at any time. But I'm going to be doing a full team build, and then we'll do some elemental builds for Divinity Original Sin 2 in Acts 1 and 2. Let me know your thoughts in the comments. Hit the subscribe button below if you enjoyed, and we'll catch y'all in the next video.